king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 178, Failed Recruitment. When Marin left Hoffman Estate and returned to Texel Island, his family did not accompany him because the spring plowing had already begun and the old Hoffmans and the Adlers had to go to the fields to supervise and even help. As for the three little guys, they were willing to go to Texel Island, but old Hoffman would not allow it. Because Simon and Albert were old enough to practice martial arts and horse riding. If these two kids went to Denburg, Marin would be too busy to take care of them. So, old Hoffman was worried that they would have too much fun and not be able to practice martial arts. Moreover, even if they were to study, Marin would not have the time to teach them. At home, Lady Mary could still teach them when she had time. The same was true for Anne. Although girls did not need to practice martial arts and horse riding, they also needed to learn from Lady Mary. Therefore, Marin could only return to Denburg with Angela. However, halfway through, Marin suddenly remembered that he was seriously lacking in talent. So he decided to recruit some talents. Where are there the most talented people? Of course, universities. However, in this era, there were not many universities in the whole of Europe. In Germany, the most famous universities were mainly for universities: Charles University in Prague, Wien University, University of Cologne and Heidelberg University. As for famous universities like the University of Göttingen, they have not been established yet. Moreover, these universities, for now, are all liberal arts schools. Not only that, theology is the first and most important subject established by these universities. Then, there are law, humanities, and medicine. Of course, not every university has medicine. Because, in this era, medicine is not very valued. Marin now controls 5 large islands, and needs at least 20 administrative talents. However, he currently has only 5 educated management talents, which is not enough. Moreover, among these 5 people, only Hader Lehmann is a college student, and the others have only studied for a few years. They are not real talents, but just makeshift ones. Moreover, for such a long time, not a single college student took the initiative to seek refuge with him. Even college students from civilian backgrounds did not seek refuge with him. The only college student official on the archipelago, Hader, was the one who was tricked by Marin to stay when Hader passed by here during his travels. Thinking that he would need his own civil service team to establish a county in the future, Marin became more eager to gain talents loyal to him. If they did not have a group of educated people, even if they occupied the county of East Frisia, they would have to cooperate with the local nobles. Because, generally speaking, only the children of nobles were educated, while the majority of civilians were illiterate. It is precisely because of the monopoly on cultural education that the aristocracy has always been prosperous. In Europe, the aristocracy's monopoly on knowledge was not broken until the powerful countries began to implement universal compulsory education in the 19th century. Then, countries such as Britain began to learn from China and conduct civil service examinations. After that, the status of the aristocracy declined sharply and they could no longer act arrogantly. The Chinese in the East have always been very different from Europe. Because of the appearance of Confucius, he promoted education for all. Therefore, many wealthy civilians in China also had the opportunity to receive education. After the Sui and Tang dynasties began to implement the imperial examination, the aristocracy's monopoly on official positions was suddenly broken. Then, the aristocracy became a rather embarrassing existence in the Chinese feudal dynasty. The same title has very different treatment in Europe and China. For example, in the Tang dynasty, although a duke could be granted a maximum of 10,000 households, the actual number was only 1,000 households, which was the so-called real title. The so-called 10,000 households was just a nominal title, with more honor than reality. In Europe, except for those who are not favored, many dukes have hundreds of thousands of people under their jurisdiction. It is normal to have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of vassal households. Even barons like Marin now have a population of 16,000 and thousands of households under their jurisdiction, which is more affordable than the dukes of China. Because the dukes of China can only have 1,000 households at most. Moreover, even if there are thousands of households, they only have the right to collect taxes, not management rights. It can be said that the dukes of China during the same period may not be as lucrative as the powerful barons with fiefs in Europe during the same period. Of course, this cannot be said. Because of the gap in agricultural productivity between China and Europe, even if the number of acres of land is similar, the output of the land in China is much greater than that in Europe during the same period. The reason for this phenomenon is that there are many educated common people in China, and with the emergence of the imperial examination system, the importance of the nobility has been greatly reduced. However, the ancient Chinese monarchs could select talents from the common people, but this was not possible in Europe. This was because education in Europe was basically controlled by the nobility and the church. The vast majority of educated people were either nobility or clergy. The priests were from the church, so Marin could not recruit them. As for the nobles, let alone them. Perhaps, dukes, earls, etc., would be easier to recruit those educated nobles. But Marin was just a baron, and it was simply a dream for him to recruit talented noble children. However, according to Heidel, although most of the students at the University of Cologne where he graduated were children of nobles and clergy, there were also a small number of children of common people. These children of common people generally came from merchant families or wealthy landowners in the countryside. Moreover, in this era, many children of nobles went to college, not necessarily by their own ability, but by relying on their family connections. However, those children of common people basically entered college by their own ability. Therefore, the children of common people who could go to college were basically talented people. For this reason, Marin made up his mind and turned around halfway and went to Cologne, intending to trick a few civilian college students into working for him. After arriving in Cologne, Marin first visited his business partner Wright, and then, through Wright's connections, sent people to infiltrate the University of Cologne to find out the situation. Later, at noon on Sunday, college students also go to church to pray on Sunday mornings. Marin took out a huge wooden board with the word recruitment written on it, erected it at the entrance of the civilian dormitory area of the law school of the University of Cologne, and moved a table to seriously prepare to recruit people. Unexpectedly, Marin's move was too advanced and unacceptable to the times. Therefore, at noon, many college students came to watch, but no one came to apply for the job. After waiting for 2 or 3 hours, not a single college student came forward to apply for the job, not even one to inquire. Marin's head was covered in cold sweat. Damn, why is it so sad? Marin was sweating inside. However, it was also because Marin had no experience. In fact, in this era, college students are a very rare species, comparable to giant pandas. With so few college students, they certainly don't have to worry about finding a job. Usually, before they graduate, they are recruited by many nobles. Even commoner college students don't have to worry about not having a job after graduation. Putting up a sign in the university is like recruiting people. Marin really thought too much. Since the beginning of the new century, universities have expanded their enrollment every year, making the number of college students as numerous as dogs, and it is difficult to find a job after graduation. Therefore, at that time, putting up a sign in the university could recruit college students. But this is the Middle Ages, there are fewer college students than pandas, and Marin is still recruiting people just by putting up a sign. He must have been kicked in the head by a donkey. In this era, if a small noble like Marin wanted to recruit a college student, he could either meet him by chance and trick him into joining the ship like he did with Hayter. Or, he could only invite college students by sending people to visit him many times like Liu Bei did 3 times. Haven't you seen that college students in Jinghua in the early 1980s basically went directly to state ministries and commissions after graduation? If they went to the local government, they would be considered to be doing poorly. Marin seemed to have remembered the actual situation of this era, so he changed his strategy and began to visit those civilian college students. However, it was also difficult. The reason is simple. People think Marin's title is too low. Yes, the title is too low. The students of the University of Cologne thought that Marin, a mere baron, could offer them a few important positions. When Marin explained that he was hiring them to manage the villages and towns on the island, these arrogant students actually looked down on him. Because these medieval geniuses thought that at least letting them manage city-level areas would be in line with their status. For example, the position of mayor of Denburg where Marin was located might attract these geniuses. However, in Marin's territory, only Denburg could be considered a city. And the current mayor Heidel himself graduated from the University of Cologne. Therefore, Marin could not offer more good positions. Therefore, Marin's visit to the University of Cologne to recruit talents was a complete failure. Of course, if Marin conquered the county of East Frisia, he would be able to provide many high-ranking positions. However, he couldn't tell these to the students of the University of Cologne. If he did, it would definitely spread and arouse the vigilance of the county of East Frisia, and maybe they would preemptively attack. Therefore, the depressed Marin could only cancel this recruitment campaign. After conquering the county of East Frisia and becoming a count, he would have enough confidence to recruit these medieval favorites. Chapter 179, Purification and Use of Potash. With a disappointed mood, Marin led the team to leave Cologne and return to Texel Island. Along the way, the little girl Angela saw that Marin was unhappy and kept comforting him. She even sang and danced to entertain Marin, which made Marin feel much better. When he returned to Denburg, Marin found that spring plowing had already started on the 5 large islands. Of course, the first step was to plow the land. Marin owned most of the horses, except for the war horses and pregnant mares, who were all taken to the fields to plow the land. In addition to these draft horses, the island also bought a lot of cattle, put nose rings on them, and took them to the fields to plow the land. After plowing the land, it is time to apply base fertilizer. In fact, it is just to mix the manure from the manure pond with nitrate soil, plant ash, fish bones, fish scraps and dead fish, and spread it on the field. Then, after a few days, it is time to sow. In fact, after the manure is used to extract nitrate soil, the nitrogen content is reduced a little, which affects the fertility. However, this is not a problem, because as long as more fertilizer is applied, the problem of reduced nitrogen content can be compensated. Now that the island has such a large population, many horses are raised, and sheep are being raised on a large scale. Therefore, there is no shortage of feces on the island. And because the Wadden Islands have a large scale of fishing, there is no shortage of fish bones, fish scraps and dead fish. Therefore, it can be said that there is no shortage of nitrogen fertilizer and phosphorus fertilizer among the 3 major fertilizers. However, the potassium fertilizer among the 3 major fertilizers is a little insufficient. Because there are not many plants on the archipelago, and there is not much wood ash. Moreover, the potassium content of wood ash is a little low. Although the potassium salt component in wood ash is potassium carbonate, it is the best potassium fertilizer, stronger than potassium chloride. Under the condition of the same potassium content, the fertilizer effect of wood ash is stronger than that of special potassium fertilizer. However, the amount of wood ash in the Wadden Islands is limited. The wood ash mainly comes from the residents cooking. But Marin promoted coal burning on the island, which reduced the output of wood ash. In addition, there are not enough plants on the islands to burn. Therefore, Marin feels that there is a lack of potash fertilizer now. Coincidentally, good news came from Kohler at this time. It turned out that Marin had asked Kohler to send people to the Harz Mountains to purchase bitter salt mines. So Kohler followed Marin's instructions and hired Jewish businessmen to go to the Harz Mountains to look for bitter salt mines. After a long period of exploration, the Jewish merchants hired by Kohler finally found the bitter salt mine. However, when the first bitter salt sample was sent back, Marin found that it was not potassium salt after flame color reaction test. The flame color reaction of potassium salt is purple. Then, after a simple experiment, Marin discovered that the bitter salt was actually Glauber's salt, hydrate of sodium sulfate, not the potassium sulfate he needed. So Kohler sent people to look for other bitter salt mines again. When Marin was worried about the lack of wood ash, a new batch of bitter salt samples was sent back. After the flame color reaction test, Marin found that it was potassium salt. However, this potassium salt seems to have a lot of impurities. Because, when this potassium salt reacts with flame color, the lavender color can't be seen clearly, and it is greatly interfered by the yellow color of the sodium element. Fortunately, Marin brought back a lot of colored glass from Venice last time, including blue cobalt glass specially used to filter yellow. Through the cobalt glass, Marin saw the long-awaited purple flame. Marin was now certain that this bitter salt contained a lot of potassium, but it was also mixed with a lot of sodium. Because it was bitter salt, it must have a lot of sulfate ions. However, Marin suspected that it might also contain a lot of chloride ions. Marin just wanted to use this bitter salt as potash fertilizer. Therefore, sodium ions and chloride ions were unnecessary. So he began to think of ways to separate the sodium and chloride ions as much as possible to increase the potassium content. Therefore, Marin found several large pots and several salt boiling workers, and began to use the principle of different solubility of salt to separate sodium and chloride ions. The solubility of sodium chloride is relatively stable and changes little with temperature. However, the solubility of potassium salt changes greatly with temperature. Marin used this principle to start a simple separation. First, Marin took out salt and prepared saturated salt water. Then, he asked the workers to heat the saturated salt water in the big pot. When the saturated salt water boiled, Marin began to add bitter salt. As soon as the bitter salt was added, a lot of crystals precipitated. Marin could conclude that these were sodium chloride, because the solution was already saturated with sodium chloride. Marin asked the workers to filter out the crystals that had just precipitated, which were excess sodium chloride. Then, when he thought it was almost saturated, Marin stopped adding bitter salt and filtered out the excess sodium chloride crystals. Then, Marin removed the flame and let the salt water cool down to room temperature. At this time, a large amount of salt precipitated out of the pot. Marin knew that the precipitated salt was probably a mixture of potassium sulfate and sodium sulfate. However, Marin had no way to separate the sodium sulfate. If it was a mixture of potassium nitrate and sodium chloride, it would be easier to separate. But the solubility of potassium sulfate and sodium sulfate was too similar to each other, making it difficult to separate. Moreover, even if some sodium ions are mixed in potassium sulfate, it actually has no effect. Anyway, it is only used as an agricultural fertilizer, not for chemical experiments, so it is not that strict. After purification, Marin conducted the flame color reaction again. After observation, Marin found that the yellow flame was much dimmer, while the purple flame was more obvious. Therefore, Marin could conclude that the potassium ion content was much higher now, and it could be used as a higher-grade potassium fertilizer than wood ash. It just so happened that Kohler's men brought back a lot of bitter salt this time, about 12 tons. Marin simply used this method to separate it. Then, about 7 or 8 tons of potassium sulfate and sodium sulfate were extracted from the dozen tons of bitter salt. Marin sent people to pack all the mixture into sacks. Afterwards, he arranged for another group of people who were unaware of the situation to pour the 7 or 8 tons of potassium sulfate and sodium sulfate mixture into various manure pits under the cover of night. Except for a few people, no one else knew. But Marin knew that this time, because of the addition of phosphorus-containing fish scraps and potassium-containing bitter salt and wood ash, the rye yield would definitely increase greatly during the autumn harvest because of the complete 3 fertilizers. I dare not say that the yield per mu is over 1,000 caddies like in later generations, but the yield per mu is still 400 to 500 caddies. This is mainly because the fertilizer effect of these soil fertilizer mixtures cannot catch up with pure fertilizers. Moreover, the seed varieties of this era are really too poor. Therefore, a yield of 400 to 500 caddies per mu is considered good. This is also because Marin promoted the method of seed selection by salt water soaking and selected excellent seeds for sowing. Although a lot of potash fertilizer was added this time, Marin was still very dissatisfied because he had no way to separate potassium sulfate from sodium sulfate. Therefore, Marin ordered Kohler to send someone to find non-bitter mineral salt, without sulfate ions, and bring it back for him to check using the flame color reaction method. If there is a purple flame, it means it contains potassium chloride. And because the salt is not bitter, it definitely does not contain sulfate ions. Using the solubility method, separating potassium nitrate and sodium chloride is very simple, and the purity is high. Of course, this is a later story. Now, Marin also has a potash mine with low purity. Marin still ordered people to buy this bitter salt mine and use it as potash fertilizer. Because bitter salt mines are useless and not expensive. The kind of non-bitter potassium salt mines that do not contain sulfate ions can actually replace sodium chloride as table salt because potassium chloride can actually replace sodium chloride. Therefore, buying such salt mines is too expensive and not cost-effective. It is better to use this bitter salt mine first. Marin heard that the price of this bitter salt mine is basically cabbage price. Before, only some unscrupulous profiteers sold these useless bitter salts to consumers as table salt. In addition, this bitter salt has no other use. Even if unscrupulous businessmen use it as table salt, it will not sell well. Because consumers will not buy this bitter salt next time after being deceived once. Therefore, this bitter salt mine is useless, so the selling price is very low. Marin can get it with very little money, so why not? Chapter 180, Spring Farming. In ancient agricultural society, spring plowing was definitely a top priority. Therefore, Marin, the Lord, must be present to participate in the ceremony. Although it is not like the East where pig heads are used to offer sacrifices to the sky, everyone must be organized to pray and hope for God's blessing. This spring plowing involved over 800 draft horses and 200 oxen. With sufficient animal power and the use of a labor-saving and efficient curved plow, the land was plowed very quickly. During the plowing process, Marin discovered an interesting phenomenon, that is, when Hayter was in charge of plowing the land, he asked the cows to try not to turn. Moreover, there were strict regulations on the length of each plowing, and the cows were not allowed to turn before the specified plowing length. Because turning too frequently would affect the efficiency of plowing. According to Hayter, this is to improve the efficiency of farming. And he told an interesting story, that is, the origin of the acre. It turned out that when Hayter was in college, a classmate from the UK told Hayter the origin of the acre. The English word acre is a unit of measurement used by the British. 1 acre is approximately equal to 6 mu. According to the definition, the area of an acre is equal to the area of a rectangle that is 1 furlong long and 1 chain wide. A furlong is equal to 660 feet, and a chain is equal to 66 feet. Seeing this, you may not feel anything, but if we understand the historical origins of the units of measurement such as acre, furlong, and chain, we can understand how long and how big it is. In ancient England, a pair of oxen were usually used to pull a plough when ploughing the land. The distance that the pair of oxen could plough without resting was called a furlong, which is actually the abbreviation of furlong. After ploughing a furlong, the oxen would rest for a while, turn around and plough again, and repeat this process until the end of the day. The area ploughed that day was an acre. If the oxen were turned around before the furlong was ploughed, the number of turns would increase, and the area ploughed by the oxen would decrease. This is why the furlong is used as the side length in the definition of acre. That is to say, if the farming is arranged properly, 2 oxen can plough an area of 1 acre, 6 mu, a day. However, the Wadden Islands used a more advanced curved plough than Europe at that time, which was much more efficient. Therefore, even if 1 ox was used to pull, 5 mu of land could still be ploughed every day. Of course, this is the standard achieved after learning from the British method of ploughing a wave in one breath and then turning. If it is a small plot like Huaxia, with frequent turns, a cow can only plough about 4 mu of land a day. Draft horses are more efficient than oxen in ploughing. For example, after using the wave and stop method and the curved plough, Marin's French draft horses could plough 6 mu of land a day, which is exactly 1 acre. However, horses are much more delicate than cows. Although horses can pull the plough faster than cows, they need to rest every once in a while, otherwise their bodies will not be able to bear it. If you don't take care of the horses' bodies, they will soon collapse or even die. Moreover, during the ploughing period, horses do not eat grass, but only oats and eggs, which is very expensive. Although cows are also fed some oats and eggs during the ploughing period, they are still mainly fed grass. Oats and eggs can only be regarded as supplementary meals to supplement nutrition. Therefore, there is no big difference between oxen ploughing and horse ploughing. Of course, in terms of efficiency, horses are faster, and in terms of cost, oxen are cheaper. With more than 800 draft horses and 200 cattle, these animals could plough nearly 1,000 acres of land every day, equivalent to 500 uglams. The total cultivated land on the islands was only 11,400 ugrams, and the cultivation of the islands began in February. Therefore, by mid-March, all the cultivated land on the islands had been cultivated. Then, Marin just purified some potassium salt and mixed it into the manure pond as a base fertilizer. There are now 16,000 people on the island, but many of them are mercenaries who are not permanent residents. Therefore, Marin also kept the fertilizer secret to prevent the fertilization process from spreading. Therefore, during the fertilization period, Marin ordered Schwartz and Frundsberg to pull the troops out for training, away from agricultural areas. The army was mainly in the southern half of East Vlieland, where there were no freshwater rivers, unsuitable for farming, and no farming scenes could be seen. Only the first batch of people who followed Marin and had their own farmland on the island were allowed to stay at home to participate in the spring ploughing. A few days later, the smell of manure had almost dissipated, and the seeds could be planted. Marin then ordered his troops to return to Denburg. Of course, Marin supplied food to these soldiers every day, and he would not let them have too much free time. They were not needed in the fields, but it was no problem for these soldiers to help build roads. For this reason, Marin sent a ship to the mainland to buy a lot of stones and hammers, and let these soldiers participate in the road construction. It was mainly to build passages between the newly built farms and to the docks. The soldiers first watered the ground to soften it. Then, they used wooden hammers to tamp the ground and compact it. Then, they sprinkled stones on it, poured water on it, and then used wooden hammers to pound it, trying to mix the soil and stones together to make the road surface more solid. In response, Marin even called it a good move. It was a form of arm strength training and also a form of military training. Is swinging a hammer to hit the ground considered training? If it were people in the 21st century, they would have been dissatisfied long ago. But the soldiers in this era are basically illiterate and have little knowledge, so they can only listen to Marin's nonsense. They really think that this is also a kind of training. After all, swinging a hammer a lot does train arm strength. Moreover, Marin, who is shameless, fooled them by saying that when swinging a hammer to hit the ground, they should imagine the ground and stones as enemies wearing plate armor, and the soldier's duty is to knock down the enemies, knock out the enemy knights in plate armor or even kill them. Then, this group of uneducated and stupid soldiers actually believed it. When they swung their hammers and smashed the ground, they were so hard. While smashing, they shouted, "So what, knight, I will smash you with my hammer." Schwartz and Frundsberg, who were acting as supervisors, rolled their eyes when they heard this. "Damn it, I am a knight, and you really want to hit me? I will remember you, and I will teach you a lesson during the next training session." Because there were no seed drills, sowing in this era was done manually. Of course, broadcast sowing is not very good. After all, it is easy to shake your hands when broadcasting, and then the seeds will be spread unevenly. Therefore, the most reliable way is to dig holes and sow seeds on the spot. But there were only so many serfs on the island, and it was very difficult to sow wheat on more than 10,000 ugrams of land. So Marin ordered all the men and women from the fishermen's families on the island to help sow wheat. These rye grains were all soaked in salt water under Marin's arrangement, and they were all good seeds with full grains. Under Marin's arrangement, most of the able-bodied men on the island came to participate in the sowing of wheat grains. The specific process is that every short straight distance, a strong man will take a sharpened stick and poke a not too deep hole in the plowed land. Then, the following woman will throw wheat seeds into the hole, dig it with her hands, cover the wheat seeds with soil, and press it down briefly, not too tight or too loose. And so on. Although there was no seed drill, Marin still required that the seeds be sown in rows and strips. The spacing was similar to that of rice seedlings in Marin's hometown in later generations, but it was denser. Because Marin knew that the denser the sowing, the better. There should still be some spacing. Because each wheat plant has its own root system and needs a certain amount of space to grow and take root. If several wheat plants grow together, there will be serious competition. Their roots will be entangled and compete for the territory and nutrients of this small area. The final result is that these wheat plants will not grow well, or only one plant will grow well. Therefore, it is better to separate the plants to avoid competition for root space and nutrients, which will result in poor growth. However, there is more than one grain of wheat planted in each pit, because you cannot guarantee that every seed will germinate. Because there is more than one seed in each pit, after germination, more than one wheat seedling will emerge from these points. At that time, according to the growth of the wheat seedlings be pulled out as weeds, giving the excellent wheat seedlings enough space to survive and absorb nutrients. During the spring plowing season, Marin gathered the serfs together for dinner every night. After each dinner, he would spread agricultural knowledge to everyone, which stunned the serfs. Even a college student like Hayder was stunned. However, as an official in charge of government affairs, Hayder understood that he must also master agricultural knowledge, otherwise he would not be able to guide others. So, when Marin boasted about the knowledge of later generations, Hayder always took out his notebook and recorded Marin's quotations. Later, relying on this notebook, Hayder also went from being an official with a pure legal major to a senior official who was proficient in agriculture, and even became the Minister of Agriculture of Marin.